Animal behaviorists tell us that the concept of sharing exists throughout the animal kingdom. The sharing of food and shelter is commonplace within family groups. But what becomes rare to the point of non-existence is the act of sharing outside the related group. In fact, the very opposite is true, as territorial concerns seek to banish the outsider and very rarely allow the unrelated to enter the fold. And so it appears that the concept of giving to the less fortunate, even when they're unknown to us, is a construct of man. While modern usage tends to use the words charity and philanthropy interchangeably, they are in fact very different in their approach. Charity, by definition, is characterized by giving to fill an immediate need, while philanthropic giving strives to seek a solution to the cause of that need. Throughout the centuries, how and why we give has undergone changes in trend and fashion. But what we find has remained consistent is that there have always been those exceptional few with a willingness to use their affluence to help others. We can't know when early man first chose to bestow a portion of his abundance on his fellow man. But as the centuries unfolded and the scholars of the day sought to create guidelines for giving, we're offered glimpses into the evolution of generosity, charity, and philanthropy. The Hammurabic Code, a Babylonian king's collection of laws and rules dating back 37 centuries, is considered the first known written legal code. Straightforward in its text and brutal in its punishments for infractions of the law, it also is unique in that it contains one of the first written mentions of concern for the less fortunate by those of means. In ancient Egypt, the Book of the Dead was a text that was buried with each individual and filled with guidelines for reaching the afterlife. The book identified a good man as one who had given food, water, and clothing to he who had none. Although further texts indicate that the pharaohs at least saw this benevolent behavior as an appeasement to the gods and a way to secure their own future in the world beyond. The Greeks can take credit for the introduction of the word philanthropy, a combination of Greek and Latin that literally translates love of mankind. But while the Greeks assigned the word philanthropic to a description of good citizenship and democratic humanitarianism, they were less inclined to bestow benevolence on a one-to-one basis, and instead their giving tended more toward the civic and cultural. Writing in a piece titled Works and Days, the Greek poet Hesiod reflected a prevalent opinion of the day by maintaining that it takes more character and is better for all concerned to say no to beggars. Touting the need for a stronger work ethic in defense of a lack of charity, he states, "Don't pester your neighbors or waste time in envy and idle dreaming. Work prospers with care. He who postpones wrestles with ruin." 600 years later, ancient Rome was a bustling multicultural city of enormous contrasts between the have and have-nots. It was a place filled with people of diverse ethnic and religious backgrounds, including those who had been uprooted from their foreign homes as spoils of war. But the Romans, like the Greeks before them, treated their gifts to the underclass in broad terms of public responsibility. While more commonplace than in Greek society, the concept of private giving was nonetheless still rare, and more apt to take the form of sportula or subsidies to those who might offer something personal or political in return. But attitudes were shifting as the great philosophers of the time were examining the duties of man to his fellow man. Cicero, as a noted Roman statesman and philosopher, was in a position to witness both the best and worst of the empire. The year of Julius Caesar's death, he wrote a paper intended for his young son titled On Moral Obligations. In it, he cited 3 rules of generosity for the act of giving. First, the gift should not be prejudicial to the recipient or others. Cicero was clear that he considered this caveat to be the most important of the 3. Having watched Caesar seize property from its rightful owners and then reward it to political allies and friends, Cicero noted, "No action can be at the same time generous and unjust." His second rule stipulated that the gift should not exceed the donor's means or impoverish his family, noting that nothing struck him as more foolish than being so generous that further generosity becomes impossible. His third point was that the gift itself should be in keeping with the merits of the recipient. Cicero believed that generosity and kindness ought not to be for one's own aggrandizement or benefit, but in keeping with the moral obligation that as a person of means, it was the right thing to do. This attitude wasn't limited or unique to the classic civilizations of the West. Nearly 400 years before Cicero, Confucius, the founder of the Ru school of Chinese thought, was offering up very much the same advice, exalting universal benevolence as a personal virtue. Confucius believed that while the parameters of man's fate are determined by a supreme being and the cycles of nature, that all men are responsible for their actions and their treatment of others, and that as such we have the power to determine what we accomplish in life and for what deeds we are remembered. The word altruism comes to us from biology, and plainly speaking relates to the concept of helping another individual of the same species to reproduce more effectively, with the direct result being that the altruists may leave fewer offspring themselves. In nature, this is most easily seen in honeybees, where all female workers exist to support the queen. Throughout the ages, regardless of the financial status of the giver, selfless giving has always existed between men. Empathy for others is an undeniable human trait, and historically all the great religions ascribe to a form of altruistic giving. Charity, or almsgiving, is an intrinsic element in almost all religions, and it connects faith with worldly deeds. Roughly 200 years before Cicero, King Ashoka's conversion to Buddhism marked a philosophical change in attitude towards giving that was historically unprecedented. Ashoka reigned over an enormous Indian empire that stretched from present-day Afghanistan to parts of Persia. After having waged a brutal war, which left 100,000 dead, and overwhelmed by the enormity of it, he embraced Buddhism with a fervor. He freed his prisoners and gave them back their land. He adopted a public adherence to tolerance of all sects and opinions, humane treatment of servants and animals, and generosity to all. His deeds exceeded simple charity and were philanthropic on a grand scale. He built universities for the common man, created great water systems for both trade and agriculture, and demanded equality for all. For all their differences, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism all share a belief in a central God who requires faith, love, and charity from followers. The Old Testament is rife with pronouncements demanding the faithful show kindness and give to the poor. The concept of alms or almsgiving is synonymous with charitable contribution and is a mainstay of almost every religion. Jesus adhered to the strong Jewish belief in the duty of charity, but felt it should be accomplished without fanfare or display. What was most unique and radical about Jesus was that he measured generosity not by the size of the gift, but rather by the amount of sacrifice of the donor. His words, "Give all you have," were in direct opposition to the Roman stance and resounded especially with those in need. Almost 1,200 years later, in the Middle Ages, a Spanish-born Jewish rabbi, Maimonides, was a student of both Muslim scholastics and the Greek philosophers. His most important work, the Mishnah Torah, outlines 8 degrees of charity. What makes this work so intriguing is that its insightful look at levels of giving are as poignant today as they were over 800 years ago. Ranked in order from least meritorious to most commendable, they are as follows. Number 8, give grudgingly. Number 7, give cheerfully but less than you should. Number 6, give after being solicited. Number 5, giving without being solicited. Number 4, giving to a recipient unknown to you who knows you. Number 3, giving to a recipient you know who does not know you. Number 2, giving to an unknown recipient who does not know your identity. This second degree was Maimonides' example of giving to a charitable fund, and he also stated that one shouldn't consider this form of giving unless the man in charge of the collection was trustworthy, intelligent, and knew how to manage properly. Modern-day scandals have proven this was a point to be taken seriously in any age. But the method of giving that this ancient scholar considered most worthy was this. Number 1, helping a needy person become self-supporting by a gift, a loan, or entering into a partnership with or providing work for him or her. In the hundreds of years that followed this simple outline of giving, mankind saw the birth of an age of benevolence and humanitarian reforms that bestowed millions of dollars for hospitals, universities, and public programs. The famous philanthropists of the 19th and 20th centuries, the names we all know, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, paved the way for the foundations and organizations, the Gates and the Skolls that characterize the business of giving in the modern world. John D. Rockefeller said, "The best philanthropy is not what is usually called charity." Today, at the start of the 21st century, with vast fortunes made seemingly overnight in a global technological age, and with the numbers of those in need even more overwhelming, as we find ourselves in a global setting made small through the power of telecommunications, the business of giving is still about the same simple premise: that those who have more have the power to influence and improve the plight of those who have less. And thanks to modern insight, dedication, generosity, and social conscience, those with the power to give will continue to write history.